Hi, preventors. Thanks for listening. Before we get started, we wanted to let you know that this episode includes conversations about sexual assault and sexual exploitation. Please take care while listening. And if you feel like skipping this episode, that's okay. We'll be back next week. Here's the episode. Hi, I'm Greg, creator of Opportunities.
And I'm Polly, princess of prevention.
And welcome to another edition of Totally Preventable. So today on our podcast, Totally Preventable, with Greg and Polly, we are ecstatic. We are very excited to have day one with us today. And so with us from day one is Yeimy and Angela. And why don't you take it from here? Yeimy, how about introducing yourself to our prevention podcast listeners out there?
Oh my gosh, guys, thank you so much. We are thrilled to be here. Thank you so much, Greg. Thank you, Polly. My name is Yeimy Bakemon-Morel. I'm the project manager in the prevention department at Day One.
Thank you. Angela, do you want to tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Angela Kemp. I use she, her pronouns. And I am the director of prevention at Day One. I am a social worker by trade, but I focus mostly on systems level and policy change work.
Nice.
All right. So let's jump right into it because we've been waiting to get Day One on our podcast for a little bit. So we're very eager, very excited. Can you please explain to our listeners what Day One is and what it's about?
Sure. So Day One is the Sexual Assault Trauma and Resource Center. We're actually one of the only organizations that are specifically organized to address sexual violence as a community-based issue. And we provide advocacy, clinical services for folks of all ages when they're disclosing a sexual assault or some kind of sexual violence has happened to them. We also have a prevention team, which Yeimy and I are a part of. And we do a lot of community education and community mobilization to effectuate change in the Rhode Island communities.
It feels as if every day we are hearing about sexual assault. What are the Rhode Island statistics? And can you please explain what exactly classifies as a sexual assault?
Sure. So I agree. We hear about it all the time, a lot more than we used to. And I think that that's a good thing. It's not that we're necessarily seeing more rates, higher rates of incidences of this happening, but that more are getting reported because we're feeling more comfortable as a society talking about these issues and responding to them. So in Rhode Island, we in 2021 there were about 800 sexual crimes reported to law enforcement in Rhode Island, and that is an increase of about 25% from the year of 2020. However, it existed, that rate is pretty similar to what we saw pre-pandemic. So rates dropped a little bit during the pandemic, and for a few reasons. The quarantining changed people's behavior, and then also felt, like the hospitals and law enforcement were less accessible during the pandemic to make those reports in the first place. So go ahead.
I'm sorry, no, I just would like to piggyback into that. Right now, we are hearing more about sexual violence and sexual assault happening. I think that this is a topic that is a hard one. It is hard to digest, and a lot of people don't like to talk about it. But the fact that these cases are coming to light, and the more people are feeling more comfortable, that is what is going to help with the prevention, because we are getting educated, and right now we are getting a little bit more comfortable bringing that topic into the table.
Yeah, we're really glad to hear that people are feeling more comfortable and wanting to know more about this issue and how they can be an active member in their community. So sexual assault, especially here in Rhode Island, refers to 3 different types of crimes. So there's first degree, which involves forced penetration. Then there's second degree sexual assault, which includes some kind of forced contact, sexual contact which includes intentional touching, whether they're clothed or unclothed. And first and second degree also includes some clauses about mental incapacitation. So if someone is under the influence of drugs and alcohol, they cannot consent to sex. We
And
also
that's
have
at no matter the age, correct? Or is that a
Yes.
minors? Or okay, no matter the age.
No matter the age, no person, adult or minor, can consent to sex if they are under the influence of drugs and alcohol. There's also a third degree sexual assault statute, which we refer to as kind of like the Romeo and Juliet statute. It very much involves it revolves around age. So if someone is over the age of 18 and engages in sexual penetration with somebody under the age of 16, which is the age of consent. So that's a little bit what sexual assault laws in Rhode Island look like.
So for the third degree, usually to put it into perspective, one of the samples that we use is think about a freshman in high school going on with a senior. And I know that sometimes in media, this seems to be like glorified. Oh my goodness, the senior is inviting me to prom. But that's just to put it into context. And also we always like to say that it's a different level of development, right? So the mindset that you have when you're a freshman is not the same mindset that you have when you're a senior, right? There is a big difference between the age gap.
Right.
Yes. And now you've told us a little bit about day one. Can you tell us what services you offer? What the general public could come and ask you for, or other organizations?
Sure. So we do advocacy work. We are a part of the Rhode Island's Victims of Crime Helpline. And so that we respond with volunteers and staff to anyone who reports to a hospital, or sometimes also to a police station. But anyone who's just closing in those venues has access to an advocate. We also have law enforcement advocates in Providence and Warwick. We also are the home to the Children's Advocacy Center, which provides a really trauma-informed and victim-centered space for children who are under the age of 14 to have their disclosures videotaped so that they can be used in criminal justice proceedings to kind of really limit the re-traumatization that can happen. We also do a lot of coordination work on cases that involve child sex trafficking, or what we like to call CSEC, it's commercial sexual exploitation of children. And then we also have a wide variety of clinical services. We have individual, family, and group therapy, and that does kind of cross the board of all ages. And then, like I said, we have our prevention team. We do a lot of education in the schools with student workshops and professional development. And then we also have some groups where we really try to get community members involved in being active agents of change and providing support to one another who are trying to effectuate change in their communities.
Well, now I heard you mention advocates. Do you ever come across language barriers, or is day one completely staffed with multilingual or multi-language advocates?
We would love that if that were the case. That is always the goal, right? You know, and it can vary certainly depending on what our team looks like at the time. I think any social service agency, that certainly can be the case. But we very much aim to fill, especially those advocacy roles, with folks who have language skills. And I know that we currently have some Spanish, Portuguese, and Mandarin skills on our staff. Yeimy, do you want to talk a little bit about our work in prevention?
Yes, definitely. And just to going into language accommodations, we're definitely trying to make accommodations and to provide the services in the language and in the way that the client, the victim, is going to be feeling more comfortable. So even if we don't have it in-house, we are definitely going to be outsourcing, just trying to see that we are able to provide that support. I also wanted to mention that in terms of the advocacy services, we also offer that support for individuals with developmental intellectual disabilities. So this is the place where they can have a forensic interview. They can be delivered in a way that is going to be taken in consideration the trauma, but also the developmental capabilities of.
Thank you. I know we struggle here with making sure that we have all of our materials translated and have the option for trainings to be in multiple languages if necessary. It's difficult, but necessary.
It is. It's something that we feel is really important too on our prevention team. There are quite a few trainings that we have available in both English and Spanish. And then we also really try hard to produce all of our resources in both English and Spanish. And those are on our website.
Terrific. You did mention the Rhode Island Sexual Violence Prevention Coalition.
Yes.
Would you mind telling us a little more about that?
Sure. So that's really one of those community mobilization efforts, and that is new for us. We had our first meeting during April, which is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So we're really aiming to bring together professionals and community members who are passionate about preventing sexual violence, and including people who don't see this as being their work or their role, but are engaging, in fact, in work that addresses the risk and protective factors for sexual violence prevention. So we're proud really to work with the partners that we have in our steering committee that are all parts of like youth leadership and empowerment, trans health professionals, student services, and domestic violence. You know, they're partners in this work. And while they are not sexual assault agencies, they are doing sexual violence prevention work. And so we hope to really build that across the state. And we want to share resources, identify what our best practices, monitor, improve data on the issue, and engage the community to take ownership of violence prevention. Go ahead, Yeimy.
Yeah, no, and I think that it is very unique and very, I will say, rewarding to see that this work is having a community approach. So really our intention, it is the work to get ignited by the community, and the community is able to identify their needs and what we need to do in order to create that change. So it's not something that is going to be dictated by us. It's something that is going to be dictated by the community members and in the way that they want it to be reflected in their communities.
Yeah. And we do have social media channels for the coalition. If anyone's interested in kind of learning more about that, it's at RISVPC.
All right. Now, I will confess, I'm a TV-aholic. You know, I'm watching all types of shows. And on these shows, a lot of times I'll hear things like you were mentioning earlier, first degree, second degree, third degree. But when it comes to shows and even the news, they talk about sexual assault, sexual exploitation, and sexual violence. Can you give a rundown of the difference between the three?
Sure. So sexual assault describes some really specific illegal acts, right, that involve physical sexual contact or penetration. That's what I described earlier when I was talking about first and second degree. Sexual exploitation is really about the abuse of someone's position of vulnerability or a power in differential to obtain either profit or sexual acts themselves. So this includes things like trafficking, sextortion, child pornography, or what we would prefer to call child sexual abuse materials, and also something that we also call survival sex. So that can really be kind of a wide range of things, but the point there is that someone is gaining from taking advantage of a vulnerability or a power imbalance. And then sexual violence is really a non-legal umbrella term. So that includes sexual assault and exploitation, but it also includes things like harassment, sexual harassment, child sexual abuse, incest. So it's much more of an umbrella term that we can use to really describe all of these acts and name them as one thing.
would revenge porn fall into one of those categories? I'm hearing now in the news, I know like Massachusetts is looking to make that illegal. Would that fall into one of those three?
I think certainly that would fall both into sexual exploitation and sexual violence.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
So I've heard you talk about how you train, that you do trainings with law enforcement and social services organizations, community groups. I would imagine there must be some stigma involved with sexual assaults and sexual violence. And how do you combat that?
It's a good question. I feel really passionate about this. Systems change work is really what motivates me, and we are constantly working to make the systems of care and the systems of justice more trauma informed and more victim centered. So we do brush up against those kinds of attitudes quite a bit, and especially I think when we talk about consent, we have a lot of challenges with that kind of concept. Folks have a hard time understanding that provocative behavior doesn't equal consent, and we see that a lot with the CSEC teens that are being exploited. Their behavior does not permit the exploitation that they're experiencing. And that it's more nuanced than a verbal no is not the only thing that indicates whether or not there is or is not consent. There's lots of body language and whatnot to take into consideration, and really consent should be affirmative. Yeimy, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the attitudes with the IDD community that we've seen?
Yes, definitely. And I think that this will be also a good opportunity for us to kind of like connect with the 4 C's of consent, because we've been talking about consent for a little bit. We definitely are trying to work with community organizations. We are community partners because we believe that we are not able to do this work alone. And in order for the work to be successful and for the change to be created, we have to do it in collaborations, and also we have to see the different perspective, right? And the different challenges that our partners and other organizations are facing, and then how we can tackle them together to create that change. For the past 2 years, we have been fortunate enough to have amazing partners in the IDD community, where we have an array of providers and also state organizations. They are working in collaboration with us, and we have been doing couple of things. So the first one is that we have been revising the sexual assault incident manual, where this is the manual that is used as guidance to respond in case of sexual assault in a specific program. So we got together as a group, and we have been seeing this is something that is working for the needs of the program. This something that actually it is trauma informed, that is going definitely to provide that support to the individual that is coming forward and it is talking about the assault. As we've been doing that work, we also realized that we need more prevention and that we need more education for the IDD community. And because
Sorry, Yeimy, I just want to pause because I don't think we've said IDD means intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Oh,
yes,
Thank
you. So, yes. Sometimes we can definitely get
we do that as well.
So, thank you so much, Angela. So we were fortunate enough to bring a training and have a train of trainer in the positive choices curriculum, where we are going to be able to provide training not only to professionals, but also to caregivers, to families, and to persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we are so excited about this step, and we know that with this information and also providing the tools to recognize abusive behaviors, that definitely we are going to be moving the needle.
Yeah, I think one of the things that came up a lot in doing this work is that there's been some historical attitudes towards prevention with this population that's really been about recognizing the vulnerabilities that are there and trying to shield from harm. But it really just further perpetuates those vulnerabilities, right? By making them more isolated and disempowered, and not having the information about what sexuality and wellness looks like, and what relationships should look like. So we really have kind of shifted the perspective on that within our own organization, and as we work out in the community, to really be more empowering and more focused on bringing that education to the population and giving them the tools to be successful.
That's great. I often feel that the IDD community as well as the elderly community are overlooked in a lot of different prevention services and programs. So it's really refreshing to hear the proactive instead of reactive way that Day One is handling this. Nowadays, you see videos and signals like on social media platforms, and it's telling or informing people on different methods to signal that you're in trouble or you're in harm's way. Do these things being publicized, does that help your work or does it hurt your work because it's triggering the perpetrator on what to look out for?
This is a really good question, and it's something we've come up with, brushed up against, I think, in some of the other work that we've done, especially with our college collaborative, which is one of the other community mobilization groups. We spent pre-pandemic, we were talking quite a bit about how to engage hospitality venues like bars and restaurants. And so things like the angel shot came up a lot, right? And to be honest, we see these kinds of tactics as risk reduction, and not primary prevention, which we feel is the most effective approach to preventing sexual violence. So what we do say is that there's some challenges in reaching all genders with these kinds of tactics. A lot of times the suggestions on how to communicate them are about putting posters up in gendered bathrooms. And in reality, everyone has the potential to be a victim regardless of their gender. People of all genders are both perpetrators and victims of sexual violence. And so that's really important to remember. And what we would really rather see is to have the people who are the professionals in those environments trained on how to intervene, and to how to assess situations to see whether or not they think there's the potential for harm or abuse, rather than the victim being the person who's responsible for signaling a need for support. That's really part of creating protective environments, which is a strategy in sexual violence, is how can we make these environments more likely to recognize abuse and to keep abuse from happening in the first place.
Just one follow-up question from that. You spoke about your mobile community getting together with the trainings for bars and restaurants. Do you find that these trainings are well attended? Are you getting pushback?
So we actually were really very early stages pre-pandemic, and we have had to pause that work, and kind of, our college collaborative has kind of shifted capacity and whatnot. But so this is work that we were really interested in, and we knew we had to kind of take a step away during the pandemic because of the burden and the experiences of the hospitality sector during the pandemic. But buy-in is certainly something that we have to constantly work at. And so we, I think had kind of pulled together people we viewed as allies in the community, to kind of get things going, to kind of pilot something to see. And certainly there are programs like that across the country.
Mhm.
So what can communities do to help prevent sexual violence from happening in the first place?
Talk about it.
Talk about it. Yeah.
Well, I think people can talk about it, and talking about it in community. Absolutely. One of the things is really making those connections, right? Nonviolent communities are connected communities. So when we're in community with each other and we have those strong connections, those bonds, and mutual support, there's those expectations of support and accountability, and it changes the behavior of people living in that community. or it has the capacity to change the behavior of the people living in that community. So I think things for communities to ask are how can my community be more connected, and how can we provide mutual support? And I think also communities can do a lot of work towards creating protective environments like we were just talking about. I think about the spaces within your community, whether that's your schools, your workplaces, where recreation happens. In particular, we've been focusing a lot on online spaces recently. And so the questions to ask yourselves are, whose safety are we prioritizing in these spaces? And is it the people who disproportionately experience harm?
And I think, Angela, that you mentioned a very important word. It is accountability. I think that that person taking responsibility for his action, regardless of who that person is. I think that sometimes if the person has a determined persona or is respected, for us, tends to be very hard to entertain that that person can be a perpetrator, that that person can be an abuser. So once we have these conversations, we will normalize that accountability. So conversations are going to be easier because there is not like this idol of this persona with a community that has to be kind of like tackled down. I think also when we have conversations around boundaries, right? And how those boundaries can be respected and consent, like what really consent means, right? So it is the mutual agreement of engaging in a determined activity and what are the elements that have to be present in order for a person to consent. I think that also it is going to help, right? So something that is going to be continuous is something that it has to be clear, like Angela was saying at the beginning. So there, the person is in a clear mindset and it is not under the influence. There is not a coercive action behind a person's agreement. So I think that once we put all that on the table, it is also going to be.
I have a little follow-up. I heard you say, to get involved in schools. I hear a lot from concerned parents around health education when it comes to sex. And at what age do you think parents or educators should start talking about boundaries and sex issues and consent and those kind of topics?
So as soon as possible is my answer. As early as possible. Like I don't think that there's a time where it's too early to start introducing these topics. Certainly, how related they become to sexuality is something that you can kind of shift towards those later ages. But there are concepts that are foundational that you can be having with a preschooler. And this is something that we have done some work on, and one of the resources that we do have on our website is the Talk guidebook. So we have a guidebook that goes through and has conversation starters for conversations around sexual violence, healthy relationships, and online safety for youth of all ages. And really, we know, this is the thing, is that we know that sexual violence thrives in silence. So it's so important that we continue to talk about it and that we talk about it early. You can teach those concepts of consent, like Yeimy was talking about, bodily autonomy, how to be an active bystander. You can teach those things without them being related at all to sex or sexuality. It can be about who is allowed to give me a hug, or who am I allowed to say no to a hug when it's offered to me, that kind of thing. So it does not have to be always about sex. Certainly, even when playing games, there's the opportunity to integrate concepts of consent into play, right? So there's many different ways that you can start having those conversations as early as possible.
Some of the difficult conversations that are out there, or we fear to have the difficult conversations, especially when it comes to characteristics and persona, such as, macho and feeling as if you're owed, or how would you recommend for communities or community organizers or just parents or even peers? How would you recommend they intervene to help try and, break down those stigmas of the macho?
I think being patient, meeting people where they're at is definitely one of those kinds of first steps. And I think as far as having those difficult conversations, being honest about what you don't know is really important. Doing research together and finding really, the appropriate spaces to have those conversations. But like I said, I think the most important thing is to just be vulnerable, to be honest, and to be authentic when having those conversations. And if you're in a situation where someone, the conversation starts actually to turn to potentially a bit of a disclosure, being non-judgmental and supportive through that process is really important.
Definitely, I think that it's important to come into that work, into the community, into that relationship with open mind and with a lot of respect. We have to understand that there are a lot of things they have been normalized for a long time, and it is really hard to break the cycle and to break some habits and like Angela said, what we don't know, we don't know. But also, we don't want to come into a conversation where we are feeling judged, right? So it is really important that we have that space to understand why some of the behaviors are happening and how we can work as a community in collaboration to break those habits.
So I recently attended a terrific webinar on internet safety that Day One put on. And we had hoped that more parents would attend because internet safety is so important. And it's, I'm not sure parents or other adults realize the connection that their sex trafficking and unsafe internet use have. Could you give us a little explanation?
The good news about that, Polly, is that we can have as many sessions as the community wants. So that's something that you can do at any time, for sure. And I think that that's how we start. Like the spark is there now. So anytime we can do it again. So oh my goodness, I can tell you that I fell in love with that session because as a parent, I saw all the things that I didn't know that I wasn't putting in place for my own child. And it was just like an aha moment. I said like, oh my goodness, this is an information that definitely have to be out to families. In many instances, like technology is a second language for our kids. It's something that they have been growing up with, and it is something that is very natural for them. And of course, we want to provide and we want to facilitate that learning and that technology so they can be up to date, and especially nowadays with the pandemic, right? Technology facilitated so many things, it made so many things easier. Us having accessibility to technology, but that also creates isolation and creates opportunity to people to abuse technology. And that's where we see the exploitation are happening. There are a lot of people, they are preying in the information that we are putting out there. They are taking the time to study our behavior, our likes, our dislikes, our moods, where we going with the people that we are associating with, and then they can portray it as this perfect person, this perfect friend that is going to be developing a relationship, and then it's just going to be accessing and probably just putting little traps here and there to get either more information, to get either photograph, to probably get into like sentimental or romantic relationship. And that is something pretty easy for our kids to fall into. And that's something that definitely we want families and the community at large to know.
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember that social media was not designed with protection in mind. It's only now that we're seeing things kind of after the fact that we're going back, right, and trying to fix these things that we are now major issues, and creating those safeguards to protect vulnerable users. But it's a little bit like a can of worms, right, has been opened, and trying to force that lid back on. We see a lot of youth that use social media like as an outlet. Like Yeimy was saying, we put so much out there, so much information about ourselves. They deal with issues in their real life by using social media, whether it's for an escape, to express something, or to connect with other people who have similar experiences. And that's where those opportunities come for exploiters to take advantage of those vulnerabilities. And like Yeimy said, yeah, they'll sometimes there's the relationship that gets fostered, and sometimes that can be romantic in appearance. And then there's the opportunity to get them to meet in person, or to blackmail them. We talked about sextortion, I think, in the beginning, or at least I named it. That's when someone elicits sexually explicit materials from person online, demands more things from them, further acts, or that they will share those images, or that they will tell the school, tell students at their schools that they're this bad person, right? So there are lots of ways that can play out, but there's always kind of that exploitation at the center. And just going back a little bit to the ways that social media is really not designed to be protective, is that we see a lot of problems with age verification tools really being ineffective. And just because, Snapchat says nobody can be over the age of 13 doesn't mean that there are people under the age of 13 on Snapchat. We know that there are minors who have been able to create OnlyFans accounts. And so that's really changing the way that we also see how youth are being trafficked or exploited online.
Right. I mean, being a parent, I've definitely seen those age verification tools, and then it's a simple addition problem that they're asking to verify. And if your kids are, what's 4 + 1, they're going to figure that out. So yeah, I completely agree.
Definitely, Greg. And usually, if your child is in that age that is able to open their personal account, then even if your child is under 18, that is his account and it is his privacy. You will not be able to have access to that.
Right.
So that is something that is important for us to also put in the mix. And usually take a look at the default settings in these applications, right? The amount of information that by default, if you don't take in consideration just going and deciding what you would like to share, that you are going to be providing to everyone that is going to be connected with you on these different platforms.
Wow, such a catch-22. It's such a scary thing, social media, and yet organizations, business companies, they know that's the best way to reach that target audience is through social media. So it's just scary and useful.
It has a lot of power.
Yeah,
it's got a power to be useful, but it's got power to harm as well. And that is kind of the difficult balance to strike. I mean, we even in our work, we find it useful. We use social media all the time trying to get prevention messages out into the community. So it's a tough battle. And I think that we're really only starting to see kind of the tip of the iceberg of the ways that the internet and technology can evolve to be tools of harm.
right. So,
No, go ahead.
do you have any suggestion for parents in regards to talking to your kids about responsible internet use and the seriousness around the dangers that it can bring?
I think that it will be starting with a honest conversations. What are your expectations, and set clear expectations. I think also setting up limits around the use at the times. Also researching what are the platforms they are being used, what are those applications that are being used, if they are truly safe. Check out the content, especially when we're talking about video games, and what is the content in that specific video game, where the devices and the applications are going to be used, and if there is a change in terms of use, right? So are we seeing probably our child is a little bit more secretive when it is using at a specific application, or when it's playing at a specific video games? So put all that in mind. I think that it's also important to mention that in some instances, it is hard for our kids to have those conversations with us because we are the authority, right? And that's how they see us. And they see us as a way that we are either going to be reprimanding or telling like exactly what they need to do. So it is important for us to listen and to provide opportunities where we really are going to be digesting what they have to say and also learning from them, because that's one of the things that we see all the time when we are providing sessions for the students. They're keeping us up to date. They're telling us what is happening, what is on trend, and what is going around. So I think that if we have that opportunity for our kids to have those honest conversations with us, a lot of things will change, and also that we will be able to prevent, and we will learn a lot.
I just want to add,
Go ahead.
I just want to add real quick, one of the tips I have for having those conversations that are difficult is to have them in the car. Have them in a place where you don't have to look at each other. It really is, you would be surprised how much easier it is to have those conversations when you're focused on doing something else. You know, there's other kinds of passive things happening, but you're in this space, in this kind of intimate space, and you don't have to look directly in each other's eyes while you're having it. It just takes so much heat out of the conversation. So that's my suggestion. I also encourage parents to ask their kids about what they're doing online, who they're interacting with, in the way that they would any other space that's outside their home, right? Find out what they're doing, who they're doing it with, and yeah, it's important. Imagine it as any other after school club, any other space that they would go to where you are not there and they are not in your home.
I'm gonna say about the car, I have 4 kids, they're young adults now, but it was a way to have a conversation that no one can walk away from you when you're in the car, and the other input isn't involved either if you're just one-on-one in the car. So let's get in the car and go for an ice cream cone, and then it turns into the conversation, and there's not other opinions being brought into the conversation.
Absolutely.
I'm wondering, is there any kind of internet help hotline? As you were speaking, I was recalling one of my children having an interaction with someone on the internet who claimed to have attempted to harm themselves while they were in a chat with them. It was someone they didn't know, didn't know personally, had a recurring, I don't know if relationship is the word, but knew them. And then once this person did, they disclosed what harm they were inflicting on themselves and then went silent. And my child was distraught at the time, and we didn't know what to do. I mean, we did try to be detectives, and we seemed to know what town this person was from, and we did call the sheriff's office and try to give as much information as we could, which was spotty, but luckily my child had been listening to, like, there had been a death in the family recently, and we gave all this information to them. But at the time, I had wished there was someone we could call and say, here's what we know, here, take this information and help us, because I felt the sheriff's office thought we're kind of nutty.
I can see how that might play out. I would say I don't think specifically for that situation that there's necessarily a dedicated hotline. Honestly, I think you could also call a suicide hotline just to get the support for going through that experience with your daughter. You know, I think if anybody interacts with suicide, has any proximity to it, those helplines can be really helpful in just processing. They're not necessarily only for people who are considering committing suicide at the time. Two of the resources that I think I would really highlight here, though, are the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They are the clearinghouse for child abductions, but also concerns about child exploitation online, and also incidences of finding sexually explicit material of children online. So they're really kind of the best way to report. And then as far as resources about harassment and things like that, I would really connect people to Right to Be, which used to be known as Hollaback. They're a community that has some really good tools and a network, a community of people who are there to support and process incidences of online harm like that. And then again, we also have resources on our website. We have the online safety guidebook for parents and caregivers in both English and Spanish on our Day One website. It's www.day1ri.org.
We have a page full of resources everyone can access.
Thank you. And I have one more question for you guys. How do you take care of yourself? Because I'm thinking when we sign off here, I'm going to have to really decompress with Greg. And it was only 50 minutes. And I'm like, it's a lot. And this is not my day-to-day conversations. And this isn't what I live. So how do you take care of you?
It is not an easy task. I think, in all honesty, I think we support each other a lot. We talk about the things that come up in our work, and especially when they're not pretty things, we work through those together and process them and find ways to hopefully do better. I think we've had a lot of conversations about our own social media use, I think, with our team. And I think many of us, in all honesty, have really scaled back our own personal use of social media while we've been doing this work. I also think for me, another thing that I do just to manage my own exposure to this is that I try really hard not to consume content that is about the topic I work on, not during my work time. So kind of keeping it in the workspace. But Yeimy probably has some other thoughts as well.
I think that being in tune and really recognizing like any sign of, like, let's say if I'm like too edgy, if I feel burned out, or I feel that something it is definitely affecting me, or I'm internalizing something a little different, just identify those spaces where we can have those conversations, and also to take a step back and make that pause and take that time to recharge and find how that recharge is going to look like. Definitely for me, it's going to be looking different than Angela, but whatever that is going to help us to reset and then come back. I think that we have been very lucky to find that and to put that structure within the work that we do. And I think that also the way that we are balancing our work week. So usually, like, we start our work week with the vision and the planning of how the week is going to look like. And then the end of the week, we have that space where we kind of like debrief and we evaluate the week. And then we kind of like adjust, and then we have time to really discuss and to make better whatever needs to be better during the week or during the work.
I do want to add too, I feel like we're really blessed to be a part of our prevention team here. Certainly some of the other folks in our agency are exposed to really difficult conversations day in and day out. So we feel really blessed to be able to be kind of the dreamers of our organization, right? And to engage not just with the violence, but with the potential for that violence to not be a problem in the future.
Wow. Well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for being on this podcast. Thank you for the wealth of knowledge that you're giving us. I mean, I never even thought about having those conversations in the car, so you won't have to look. That is like genius. That's mind blowing to me. Like, I can't wait to go home and get in the car and take each kid out on their separate drive and get all the information I can. But I thank you. Before we sign off, can you please just give out your website again, so we can make sure that our listeners know where to get these tools and know how to stay in contact with Day One?
Sure. So we are www.day1ri.org. And then we also are on social media at Facebook and Instagram at Day1RI.
And if there is anyone that needs help or that is experiencing violence, they can call at any time our helpline, and that is 1-800-494-8100 or 8100.
Thank you so much to both of you. This has been so interesting and informative. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.